The sun hung like a blazing copper penny in the sky as the stagecoach rolled to a dusty stop in Panamint, California. Wilhelmina Sinclair clutched her worn leather satchel to her chest, heart pounding as the door swung open to reveal the mining town sprawled before her. After 32 days of grueling travel from her native Vienna, she had finally arrived in America's untamed West, the place where she would begin her new life as a schoolteacher. "This is it, madam," the driver announced, offering a calloused hand to help her down. "Panamint. End of the line." Wilhelmina stepped down from the coach, the dust immediately coating her blue traveling dress. The year was 1876, and the promise of opportunity had drawn her across an ocean and a continent to this remote outpost. The California sun beat down mercilessly, a stark difference from the cool Austrian climate she had left behind. "Thank you, sir," she replied, wincing internally at the way her thick Austrian accent transformed the simple phrase. Even after years of studying English, the melodic lilt of her native tongue clung to every word she spoke. The driver nodded curtly, already moving to unload her trunk. Wilhelmina took a moment to survey the town that would be her home. Panamint had sprung up rapidly after silver was discovered in the nearby hills 3 years prior. Now, it bustled with activity. Miners, merchants, and the occasional well-dressed businessman hurried along the wooden boardwalks that lined the main street. Taking a deep breath, Wilhelmina gathered her courage and approached a weathered building with a hand-painted sign that read, "Panamint Hotel." The bell above the door jingled as she entered, causing the round-faced proprietor behind the counter to look up from his ledger. "Good afternoon," she said carefully, enunciating each syllable. "I am the new schoolteacher, Wilhelmina Sinclair. I believe the school board has arranged accommodations for me." The man's bushy eyebrows shot up and a bemused smile crossed his face. "Well, I'll be. You're the teacher they sent." "With that fancy talk," he chuckled, making no effort to hide his amusement. "Board did mention someone coming, but they didn't say nothing about you being foreign." Wilhelmina felt heat rise in her cheeks but maintained her dignified posture. "Yes, I am from Austria. I am fully qualified to teach, having completed my education at the Teachers' College in Vienna." The proprietor, whose name badge identified him as Harold Miller, laughed again. "Vienna, huh? Well, Miss Sinclair, we got your room ready upstairs. Hope the youngsters can understand what you're saying." He slid a heavy iron key across the counter. "Room 4, top of the stairs." "Thank you, Mr. Miller," she said stiffly, taking the key. She had barely touched it when the door opened again and 2 women entered. They paused their conversation when they spotted Wilhelmina, their curious gazes taking in her travel-worn appearance. "Ladies," Harold called out, "meet our new schoolmarm, all the way from—" Where was it again? "Austria," Wilhelmina supplied, offering a polite smile to the women. "Austria," one of the women repeated, her voice dripping with skepticism. "Well, I'll be. They couldn't find anyone from America to teach our children," the second woman snickered. "How are the children supposed to learn proper English from someone who can barely speak it herself?" Wilhelmina's smile faltered, but she refused to show how deeply their words cut. "I assure you, my English is quite adequate for instruction. I look forward to meeting your children." The women exchanged looks before the taller one said, "Well, miss, what was your name again?" "Sinclair." "Wilhelmina Sinclair." "Miss Sinclair," she pronounced it with exaggerated precision. "I'm Mrs. Peterson, head of the Ladies' Aid Society. This is Mrs. Bennett. We'll be watching your progress with interest." With that thinly veiled threat hanging in the air, Wilhelmina nodded politely and excused herself to find her room. Once inside the small but clean chamber, she allowed herself a moment of doubt. Perhaps coming to this wild frontier had been a mistake. But the memory of her father's funeral and the mounting debts that had forced the sale of their family home in Vienna strengthened her resolve. She had nowhere to go but forward. The next morning, Wilhelmina rose early, determined to make a good impression on her first day at the schoolhouse. She dressed in her best navy blue skirt and white shirtwaist, pinning her thick blonde hair into a neat bun. After a quick breakfast in the hotel's dining room, during which she endured more curious stares and barely disguised smirks at her accent, she set out for the one-room schoolhouse at the edge of town. The building was modest but solidly constructed, with a small bell tower perched on the roof. Inside, rows of wooden desks faced a larger teacher's desk and blackboard. Wilhelmina busied herself preparing for the day, writing her name carefully on the board and organizing her lesson materials. By 8 o'clock, children began to arrive. Some entered shyly, while others burst in with the boundless energy of youth. Most stopped short when they saw her, whispering among themselves. By the time the bell rang, 24 students ranging from 6 to 16 years of age had assembled, along with several parents who stood at the back of the room, arms crossed in judgment. Wilhelmina cleared her throat. "Good morning, children. I am Miss Sinclair, your new teacher." A ripple of giggles spread through the room, and one young boy in the front row loudly whispered, "She talks funny, Thomas Wilson." His mother scolded from the back, though Wilhelmina noticed she was fighting a smile herself. "Yes, I come from Austria," Wilhelmina said, standing straight and addressing the issue directly. "It is a beautiful country far across the ocean. My accent may sound different to you, but I promise we will learn many wonderful things together." She began by asking each child to introduce themselves, carefully noting their names in her register. The younger children seemed to warm to her quickly, fascinated by her musical way of speaking, as one little girl put it. The older students, particularly the teenagers, remained skeptical, exchanging glances whenever she pronounced certain words differently. By midday, most of the parents had departed, apparently satisfied enough to leave their children in her care. Wilhelmina led the students through reading exercises, arithmetic, and a geography lesson about Europe that had them genuinely interested. When she dismissed them at 3 o'clock, she felt a tentative sense of accomplishment. That feeling was short-lived. As she locked the schoolhouse and turned to walk back to town, she found Mrs. Peterson and several other women waiting for her. "Miss Sinclair," Mrs. Peterson said with a tight smile, "the Ladies' Aid Society would like a word about your teaching methods." "Of course," Wilhelmina replied cautiously. "Several parents have expressed concern about your accent," Mrs. Bennet interjected. "They worry the children will pick up improper speech patterns." "I understand your concerns," Wilhelmina said carefully, "but I assure you no offense intended," interrupted a third woman, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But how can you teach proper American English when you sound so foreign?" "My accent does not affect the curriculum," Wilhelmina defended herself. "The children are learning standard grammar and spelling. Well, we think it might be best if you focus on subjects like arithmetic and leave the language instruction to Mrs. Peterson's daughter, Clara. She's completed high school in Sacramento and speaks properly." Wilhelmina felt her chest tighten with indignation and hurt, but years of proper upbringing prevented her from showing it. "I appreciate your suggestion, but I was hired to teach all subjects. If the school board wishes to discuss a change in duties, I would be happy to meet with them formally." The women looked surprised at her polite but firm refusal to be intimidated. Before they could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew everyone's attention. 3 riders approached from the direction of the hills, dust clouds billowing behind them. The man in front rode a magnificent chestnut stallion with such natural ease that man and beast seemed to move as one. As they drew closer, Wilhelmina could see he was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and a strong jaw partially hidden by several days' worth of stubble. "Ladies," he greeted, tipping his wide-brimmed hat as the riders slowed to a stop beside the group. His voice was deep with a slight drawl that marked him as not originally from California. "Everything all right here. Just fine, Mr. Blackburn," Mrs. Peterson replied, her demeanor instantly warmer. "Just welcoming our new teacher. This is Miss Sinclair from Austria of all places." The rider turned his piercing blue eyes to Wilhelmina, studying her with interest. "Austria? That's quite a journey." He dismounted in one fluid motion and extended his hand. "Ethan Blackburn. I run the Silver Creek Ranch just outside town." "Wilhelmina Sinclair," she replied, taking his offered hand briefly. "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Blackburn." Something flickered in his eyes when she spoke, not the usual mockery, but something else she couldn't quite identify. "Mr. Blackburn supplies most of the beef to Panamint, Mrs. Bennett explained with a simpering smile that made Wilhelmina wonder if the woman had a personal interest in the rancher. "His cattle drive just returned yesterday." "Successful trip?" Wilhelmina asked politely. "Profitable enough," Ethan replied with a slight smile. "Though I'm more interested in hearing how your first day of teaching went, Miss Sinclair." Before she could answer, one of the other women cut in. "We were just discussing how Miss Sinclair's thick accent might confuse the children." Wilhelmina's face burned with embarrassment, but she held her chin high. "Is that so?" Ethan's expression hardened slightly as he glanced at the group of women. "Well, I find that hard to believe. Miss Sinclair speaks English better than half the miners in this town." The unexpected defense took everyone by surprise, especially Wilhelmina. "But surely you notice how different she sounds," Mrs. Peterson insisted. Ethan Blackburn looked directly at Wilhelmina then, his gaze thoughtful. "Different isn't always bad, Mrs. Peterson. In fact," a small smile played at his lips, "I think her voice is pure music to me." The sincerity in his voice left Wilhelmina momentarily speechless. The women looked between them with varying expressions of surprise and disapproval. "Well," Mrs. Peterson said stiffly, "we should be going." "Good day, Miss Sinclair, Mr. Blackburn." The women departed with barely concealed huffs of indignation. Once they were out of earshot, Wilhelmina turned to the cowboy. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Blackburn, but you need not have defended me." "Wasn't just being kind," he replied, his blue eyes still studying her with interest. "This town can be hard on newcomers, especially those who are different in any way. Don't let them chase you off." "I have no intention of leaving," she assured him, surprised at her own determination. "I signed a contract for the school year, and I intend to honor it." Ethan nodded approvingly. "Good. Panamint needs more people with backbone." He glanced back at his waiting companions. "I should get going. My foreman and I have business with the bank before it closes." "Of course." Wilhelmina hesitated, then added, "Thank you again, Mr. Blackburn." "Ethan," he corrected with a smile that transformed his weathered face. "And you're welcome, Miss Sinclair." As he mounted his horse and rode toward town with his men, Wilhelmina found herself watching him longer than was strictly proper. There was something compelling about the rancher, who had defended her so unexpectedly, something that made her wonder if perhaps Panamint might eventually feel like home after all. The following weeks proved challenging for Wilhelmina. While many of her students were warming to her, a vocal group of parents continued to question her suitability. The rumors and mockery spread through town like wildfire. Shopkeepers imitated her accent when she tried to make purchases. Young men tipped their hats and asked her to say something Austrian, as if she were a curiosity in a traveling show. The hotel dining room often fell silent when she entered, only to erupt in whispers after she passed. Through it all, she maintained her dignity, focusing on her students and finding solace in letters to her sister back in Vienna. The one bright spot was her occasional encounters with Ethan Blackburn. Though their paths crossed infrequently, he spent most of his time at his ranch miles from town. He always greeted her with genuine respect and often asked about her teaching. One Saturday afternoon in mid-September, Wilhelmina was browsing the shelves of Panamint's small bookshop when the bell above the door jingled. She turned to find Ethan entering, looking somewhat out of place among the neat rows of books in his dusty riding clothes. "Miss Sinclair," he said, seeming pleasantly surprised. "Didn't expect to find anyone else here on such a fine day." "Mr. Blackburn," she acknowledged with a smile. "I find books to be good company when human companionship is limited." Understanding crossed his face. "Town still giving you trouble?" she shrugged slightly. "Some days are better than others. The children are beginning to understand me quite well, which is what truly matters." Ethan stepped closer, his eyes falling to the book in her hands. "Whitman, you enjoy poetry?" Surprised by his recognition of the volume, she nodded. "Very much. Although I admit I am still learning to fully appreciate American poets. Their imagery is quite different from what I grew up reading." "Whitman captures something essential about this country," Ethan said, gently taking the book from her hands and flipping through the pages. "The wildness, the possibility." He found a page and began to read softly. "Give me the splendid silent sun with all his beams full dazzling." His voice, deep and resonant, gave the words new life. Wilhelmina watched him, amazed to find such literary appreciation in a man she had assumed spent his days concerned only with cattle and ranch business. When he finished the verse, he looked up to find her staring. "What?" he asked with a self-conscious half-smile. "Surprised a cowboy can read." "Not at all," she replied quickly. "Just pleased. Many in town seemed shocked that I maintain a personal library. They act as if books are unnecessary luxuries. Out here, many consider them exactly that." He handed the volume back to her. "But I've always believed a life without stories is only half-lived." Their conversation was interrupted when the shopkeeper emerged from the back room. "Mr. Blackburn," the man said cordially, before his eyes fell on Wilhelmina and his tone cooled noticeably. "Miss Sinclair." "Afternoon, Tompkins," Ethan replied. "Just came in for that order of ledgers and the book I requested." "Of course, sir. Right this way." The shopkeeper led Ethan toward the counter, casting a suspicious glance back at Wilhelmina as if she might pocket something while his back was turned. She returned to her browsing, trying to ignore the slight. A few minutes later, she felt a presence at her side again. "Miss Sinclair," Ethan said quietly, "I was wondering if you might do me a favor." "A favor?" she asked, curious. "My niece Emily is visiting from San Francisco. She's 12 and quite bright, but missing school during her stay. I thought perhaps you might recommend some suitable reading material for her." Wilhelmina brightened at the task. "I would be delighted. What subjects interest her?" "History, mainly, and adventure stories, much to her mother's dismay." Wilhelmina moved purposefully through the shelves, selecting several volumes she thought appropriate for a bright 12-year-old girl. As she explained her choices to Ethan, she noticed the shopkeeper watching them with poorly disguised curiosity. "These are excellent suggestions," Ethan said, adding them to his purchase. "In fact, would you consider something else? Emily has been complaining of boredom at the ranch. Perhaps you might come for dinner tomorrow and meet her. I'm sure she'd be thrilled to talk with a real teacher from Europe." The invitation took Wilhelmina by surprise. That is very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose. No imposition at all. Sunday dinners can be quiet affairs, and Emily would benefit from your company." His eyes twinkled. "And selfishly, I'd enjoy a conversation that doesn't revolve entirely around cattle prices." Wilhelmina hesitated only briefly. The prospect of an afternoon away from the increasingly hostile town was appealing. "Thank you, I would be pleased to accept." "Excellent." His smile was warm. "I'll send a buggy for you around noon if that suits." "Perfectly," she replied, unable to suppress her own smile. After Ethan paid for his purchases and left, Wilhelmina approached the counter with her selection, the Whitman volume, and a book of Western folk tales she thought might help her better understand the culture of her new home. The shopkeeper's expression had transformed from coolness to calculating interest. "Didn't realize you were acquainted with Mr. Blackburn," he remarked as he tallied her purchases. "We have met on several occasions," she replied neutrally. Interesting man, Blackburn. Came here 5 years ago, bought that failing ranch, and turned it around faster than anyone thought possible." He leaned forward conspiratorially. "Rumor has it he was some kind of Eastern gentleman before coming west. Educated, like you can hear in his speech sometimes." Wilhelmina made a non-committal sound, not wanting to encourage gossip. "Course, he keeps to himself mostly. Doesn't court the local ladies, though plenty have tried." The shopkeeper winked. "Mrs. Bennett's had her eye on him since her husband passed, but he's never shown interest." "That will be all, thank you," Wilhelmina said firmly, placing coins on the counter. She had no desire to discuss Ethan Blackburn's personal life with this man. As she left the shop, books tucked under her arm, she wondered what exactly she had agreed to. A simple dinner with a student and her uncle seemed innocent enough, but in a town as prone to gossip as Panamint, such a visit to a bachelor's ranch might fuel unwanted speculation. Still, the prospect of intellectual conversation and a reprieve from the town's daily slights outweighed these concerns. Besides, she reasoned, the presence of Ethan's niece made the visit entirely proper. What she didn't admit to herself was how much she was looking forward to seeing Ethan Blackburn again, in his own element, away from the judgmental eyes of Panamint. Sunday arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze that tempered the September heat. Wilhelmina dressed with care in her best day dress, a dove-gray gown with subtle lavender piping that her sister had insisted she bring to America for special occasions. She arranged her blonde hair in a simple but elegant knot at the nape of her neck, and permitted herself a small dab of lavender water behind each ear, a luxury she rarely indulged in. Precisely at noon, a well-maintained buggy pulled up outside the hotel. To her surprise, Ethan himself was driving rather than a ranch hand. "Good afternoon, Miss Sinclair," he greeted, stepping down to assist her. "You look lovely." "Thank you, Mr. Blackburn," she replied, accepting his hand as she climbed into the buggy. She was acutely aware of curious eyes watching from the hotel windows and neighboring buildings. "I hope you don't mind the open air," he said as he settled beside her and took up the reins. "It's about an hour's drive to Silver Creek, but the scenery makes up for the time." As they left Panamint behind, Wilhelmina felt tension she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying begin to ease from her shoulders. The landscape opened up around them, rugged hills dotted with scrub pine and sage, dramatic rock formations catching the sunlight, and in the distance, the blue-purple outline of mountains. "It is beautiful," she said, drinking in the wild panorama. "Different from Austria, of course, but beautiful in its own way." "How long have you been in America?" Ethan asked, guiding the horses around a bend in the road. 6 months. I arrived in New York in March, then traveled to San Francisco before coming to Panamint. That's quite a journey to make alone. I had little choice, she admitted. After my father passed away last year, our financial situation became difficult. Teaching positions for women in Vienna are competitive, and when I saw the advertisement for a position in California, the salary offered was much better than anything available at home. Ethan nodded, understanding in his eyes. It takes courage to leave everything familiar behind. It was that, or watch my mother and sister lose our family home, she said simply. The salary here allows me to send money back to them each month. Your English is excellent, he observed. You must have studied for years. My father was a professor of languages. He believed education was the greatest gift he could give his daughters. A small smile touched her lips at the memory. He would be pleased to know his teachings helped me secure a position, even if the locals are less than impressed with my accent. Don't let them bother you, Ethan said, his jaw tightening slightly. Half the people in that town couldn't find Austria on a map. Most of them have never ventured beyond California's borders. And you, Mr. Blackburn, the shopkeeper hinted you were not always a rancher. A shadow passed briefly over his face. People talk too much in small towns. After a pause, he added, but yes, I had another life before coming west. I was raised in Boston, attended Harvard for a time. What brought you to California? The need for a fresh start, he said, his tone suggesting the topic was closed for now. Look there. He pointed toward a ridge where a small herd of deer grazed, deftly changing the subject. They continued in comfortable conversation as the miles passed. Ethan pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the area's history, while Wilhelmina found herself speaking more freely than she had since arriving in America. Whether it was the distance from town or Ethan's genuine interest, her usual self-consciousness about her accent faded as they talked. After cresting a final hill, the Silver Creek Ranch came into view in the valley below. Wilhelmina caught her breath at the sight. A substantial two-story house of weathered wood and stone stood at the center of the property, surrounded by smaller outbuildings, corrals, and a barn. A creek lined with cottonwoods wound through the valley, explaining the unusual lushness of the ranch compared to the drier surrounding landscape. It's beautiful, she said softly. Thank you, Ethan replied, pride evident in his voice. It was in rough shape when I bought it, but the water rights made it worth the investment. As they approached, a young girl with auburn hair came running from the house, waving enthusiastically. Uncle Ethan, you're back, she called, practically bouncing with excitement. And I've brought our guest, he replied, bringing the buggy to a stop. He helped Wilhelmina down, then found himself wrapped in an enthusiastic hug from his niece. Emily, mind your manners, he chided gently. This is Miss Sinclair, the teacher I told you about. The girl immediately straightened and offered a surprisingly proper curtsy. How do you do, Miss Sinclair? I'm Emily Blackburn. Uncle Ethan says you're from Europe and know all sorts of interesting things. Wilhelmina couldn't help but smile at the girl's enthusiasm. It's a pleasure to meet you, Emily. Your uncle mentioned you enjoy history and adventure stories. Emily's eyes widened. I do. Do you like them too? Mother says they're not suitable for young ladies, but Uncle Ethan lets me read whatever I want when I visit. I believe young minds should explore many subjects, Wilhelmina replied, earning an approving nod from Ethan. Come inside, he invited. Mrs. Ortiz, our housekeeper, has prepared dinner, and I'm sure she's eager to meet you as well. The interior of the ranch house surprised Wilhelmina with its refined elegance. While the architecture was decidedly Western, the furnishings reflected educated taste, well-crafted furniture, landscape paintings in gilt frames, and bookshelves lined with leather-bound volumes. Most ranchers' homes she had glimpsed in her travels were utilitarian at best, but Ethan's home spoke of comfort and culture. "Your home is lovely," she commented as he led them into a dining room where the table was already set with fine china and crystal that seemed at odds with the frontier setting. "Thank you. I believe one can live in the wilderness without surrendering completely to it," he replied with a small smile. Mrs. Ortiz, a middle-aged Mexican woman with a kind face and capable hands, emerged from the kitchen carrying a tureen of soup. She greeted Wilhelmina warmly and soon served a meal that would have been impressive in any eastern city, let alone a remote California ranch. Roasted beef with herbs, fresh vegetables from the ranch garden, homemade bread, and a blackberry pie for dessert. Throughout the meal, conversation flowed easily. Emily peppered Wilhelmina with questions about Austria, European history, and what it was like to cross the ocean. Ethan occasionally reined in his niece's enthusiasm, but mostly observed their interaction with evident pleasure. "Perhaps Miss Sinclair would like to see the library after dinner," he suggested, as Mrs. Ortiz cleared away the dessert plates. Emily bounced in her seat. "Oh yes, Uncle Ethan has the best books. He even has novels by women authors that Mother would never allow at home." The library proved to be Ethan's sanctuary, a room lined floor to ceiling with bookshelves, comfortable leather chairs positioned near the stone fireplace, and large windows that captured the valley view. Wilhelmina moved slowly along the shelves, running her fingers along the spines of volumes in English, French, and even a few in German. "You read German?" she asked, surprised to find a copy of Goethe among his collection. "Not fluently," Ethan admitted. "I studied it briefly in college." "I'm better with French. Uncle Ethan speaks French to me sometimes." Emily piped up from where she had settled in one of the chairs with a book. "He says it's important for a young lady to be cultured." "And he's absolutely right," Wilhelmina agreed. She pulled a volume of poetry from the shelf. "This is one of my favorites," she said, showing him a collection of Keats. "Mine as well," Ethan replied, his eyes warming as they met hers. The afternoon stretched pleasantly as they discussed literature and history. Emily eventually excused herself to explore the creek with Mrs. Ortiz's young son, leaving the adults alone in the library. "Your niece is delightful," Wilhelmina said, watching through the window as the children skipped stones across the water. "So bright and curious." "She reminds me of myself at that age," Ethan replied, moving to stand beside her at the window. "Always asking questions, always wanting to know more than what was in her lessons. It's refreshing to see a man who values education for young women. My sister Emily's mother had the same opportunities I did growing up, though our father considered it mainly a way to make her more marriageable." A shadow crossed his face. "She married well, by society's standards, a wealthy banker in San Francisco. But he's a rigid man who believes women should concern themselves only with social matters and household management." "And you disagree?" "Vehemently," he said with feeling. "My mother was an educated woman who maintained her intellect and opinions throughout her marriage. I was raised to believe intelligence has no gender." Wilhelmina studied him thoughtfully. "You are not what I expected when I first met you, Mr. Blackburn. Please call me Ethan," he said softly, "at least when we're away from the prying eyes of Panamint." "Ethan," she agreed, the name feeling intimate on her lips. "And you may call me Wilhelmina, though most find it quite a mouthful." "Wilhelmina," he repeated, his pronunciation perfect. "It suits you, elegant and distinctive." A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched the children play. Eventually, Wilhelmina asked the question that had been on her mind since their conversation in town. "What really brought you to California, Ethan? You mentioned needing a fresh start, but there must be more to the story." He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. Finally, he turned from the window to face her, his blue eyes serious. "Grief," he said simply. "And guilt. My wife and infant son died in childbirth 6 years ago. Caroline was everything to me. After losing her, Boston became unbearable. Too many memories, too many well-meaning friends and family offering condolences that only deepened the wound." "I am so sorry," Wilhelmina said softly, understanding now the shadows she sometimes glimpsed in his eyes. "I came west intending to lose myself," he continued. "Maybe even to die. I spent a year drifting, taking increasingly dangerous work, caring little whether I survived each day." He gestured around the library. "Then I found this place failing, neglected, but with so much potential. Something about it spoke to me, demanded that I care again." "And you transformed it," she observed. "It transformed me," he corrected. "Gave me purpose when I had none, a reason to wake each morning." Wilhelmina felt honored by his confidence, by this glimpse into his pain. "Thank you for sharing that with me." "There's something about you, Wilhelmina," he said, his gaze holding hers. "Something that makes me remember who I was before grief changed me. Perhaps it's your courage in facing a town full of ignorant prejudice, or your dedication to your students, or simply the way you appreciate poetry." A small smile touched his lips. "Or perhaps it truly is your voice, like music carrying memories of a more civilized world." The intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. For a moment she thought he might move closer, might even take her hand. Instead, the grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 4 times, breaking the spell. "I should prepare to return to town," she said reluctantly. "Tomorrow is a school day." "Of course," he agreed, though he looked equally reluctant to end their time together. "Let me call Emily to say goodbye." The drive back to Panamint was filled with comfortable conversation, though Wilhelmina found herself wishing the journey were longer. As they approached the outskirts of town, Ethan slowed the horses. "Wilhelmina," he said, his tone serious, "I've enjoyed your company tremendously today. I hope. That is, I wonder if you might consider visiting again. Perhaps next Sunday. Emily would be delighted, and so would I." Her heart quickened at the invitation, even as caution whispered in her ear. "I would like that very much," she admitted, "but I fear it might cause talk in town." "Let them talk," he said dismissively. "Unless, are you concerned about your position at the school?" She hesitated. The school board had made it clear that the teacher's moral conduct must be above reproach. Regular visits to a bachelor's home, regardless of a niece's presence, might indeed raise eyebrows. "Perhaps it would be best if I invited Emily to accompany me to town one day instead," she suggested as a compromise. "We could visit the bookshop and perhaps have tea at the hotel." Understanding filled his eyes. "Of course, that's a sensible suggestion." He paused, then added, "But the invitation remains open, Wilhelmina. My home, my library, is yours to visit whenever you wish." When they reached the hotel, Ethan helped her down from the buggy, holding her hand a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Thank you for a lovely day," he said. "Thank you for the respite from town," she replied sincerely. "And please give my regards to Emily." As she watched him drive away, Wilhelmina was acutely aware of curtains twitching in nearby windows. By morning, all of Panamint would know she had spent the day at Ethan Blackburn's ranch. She straightened her shoulders and walked into the hotel with her head high. Let them talk. For the first time since arriving in this dusty town, she had found someone who valued her for exactly who she was. The following weeks brought significant changes to Wilhelmina's life in Panamint. As she had predicted, Her visit to the Blackburn ranch became the primary topic of gossip throughout town. Some speculation was benign, focusing on the unlikely friendship between the refined foreign teacher and the successful rancher. Other rumors were less charitable, questioning her moral character and suggesting impropriety. To Wilhelmina's surprise, the gossip had an unexpected effect on her standing in the community. Rather than further isolating her, her association with one of the area's most respected property owners seemed to elevate her status. Shopkeepers who had previously mocked her accent now served her with grudging politeness. Parents who had questioned her teaching abilities suddenly found fewer faults with their children's education. Even Mrs. Peterson, who had been her most vocal critic, moderated her public disapproval, though Wilhelmina suspected this had more to do with the woman's own interest in Ethan than any genuine change of heart. For his part, Ethan began to appear in town more frequently. He would casually stop by the schoolhouse after classes to inquire about books for his niece or to discuss the latest shipment at the bookstore. Sometimes he brought Emily, who had developed an immediate attachment to Wilhelmina and eagerly soaked up her knowledge of European history and literature. On one such afternoon in early October, Ethan and Emily accompanied Wilhelmina to the town's small cafe for tea after school. As they settled at a table by the window, Wilhelmina noticed several townspeople watching them with interest. "Everyone is staring," she murmured to Ethan. "Let them," he replied with a casual shrug. "They've little enough entertainment in this town." Emily, oblivious to the attention, chattered happily about the book Wilhelmina had lent her. "I never knew Queen Elizabeth was so clever. The way she outmaneuvered all those men trying to control her, it's better than any adventure story." "History often provides the best stories," Wilhelmina agreed, smiling at the girl's enthusiasm. "And women's contributions are frequently more significant than your school primers might suggest." "Uncle Ethan says the same thing," Emily nodded. "He says the history books were all written by men, so they leave out the important parts about women." Wilhelmina glanced at Ethan with new appreciation. "Your uncle is a wise man." "Not wise enough to avoid making enemies in Boston," he replied with a self-deprecating smile. "My progressive views on women's education weren't universally appreciated in certain circles." Their conversation was interrupted when the cafe door opened, and three men entered well-dressed with the confident bearing of those accustomed to authority. Wilhelmina recognized one as the mayor, another as the bank president, and the third as Mr. Harrison, head of the school board. The men nodded respectfully to Ethan before Mr. Harrison approached their table. "Afternoon, Blackburn, Miss Sinclair," he said, tipping his hat. "Might I have a word with you, Miss Sinclair? School business." "Of course," she replied, setting down her teacup. "Please excuse me," she added to Ethan and Emily. She followed Mr. Harrison to a quiet corner of the cafe, her stomach tightening with apprehension. Was she about to be dismissed? Had the gossip finally turned the board against her? "Miss Sinclair," Harrison began, his expression unreadable, "the board has been discussing the school's needs for the coming winter months." "Yes, sir," she replied cautiously. "As you know, enrollment has increased since term began. We're now at 32 students, with 3 more families expected to arrive before the first snow." Wilhelmina nodded, waiting for him to continue. "The current schoolhouse is becoming inadequate for our needs. The board has approved funds for an expansion, adding a second room and improving the heating system." He cleared his throat. "We'll need to temporarily relocate classes during construction, likely for most of November. Several options have been proposed, but Mr. Blackburn approached us yesterday with an unexpected offer." "Mr. Blackburn," she repeated, surprised. Yes, he's offered the use of his ranch's bunkhouse. Says his men are on a cattle drive until December, so it's sitting empty. It's clean, warm, and large enough for our purposes. Harrison studied her carefully. The board is inclined to accept, but as this would require you to stay at the ranch during the week, it's too far to travel daily. We wanted to ensure you were comfortable with the arrangement. Wilhelmina's mind raced. Living at Ethan's ranch, even temporarily. The impropriety would be scandalous by Eastern standards, yet the practical reality of frontier life often necessitated arrangements that would raise eyebrows in more established communities. Mrs. Ortiz would act as chaperone, of course, Harrison added, seeming to read her hesitation. And weekend transportation to town would be provided. I see, she said carefully. And the board has no concerns about such an arrangement. Harrison's mouth quirked in what might have been amusement. Miss Sinclair, this is the frontier. We're practical people. The children need education, you need a classroom, and Blackburn has offered a solution that costs the town nothing. He lowered his voice. Besides, Blackburn's a respected businessman who brings considerable revenue to Panamint. If he vouches for your character, that's good enough for most folks. Wilhelmina considered the proposal. Living at the ranch would mean access to Ethan's library, distance from the daily slights of town, and the pleasure of Emily's company during her extended visit. It would also mean seeing Ethan daily, a prospect that made her heart beat faster than was entirely proper. If the board approves, I have no objection, she said finally. Excellent. Harrison looked relieved. Construction begins Monday next. Blackburn has offered to transport you and the necessary school materials to the ranch on Sunday afternoon. After Harrison rejoined his colleagues, Wilhelmina returned to the table where Ethan and Emily waited expectantly. Well? Ethan asked, though his slight smile suggested he already knew the outcome. It seems I'm to be your house guest for the month of November, she replied, unable to keep a note of accusation from her voice. You might have mentioned your offer to the board before now. I wanted to be sure they'd accept before mentioning it to you, he explained. No sense getting your hopes up. My hopes, she echoed, raising an eyebrow. For access to my library, he clarified, though the twinkle in his eye suggested he understood the other implications perfectly. Emily will be delighted to have you as a teacher all to herself in the evenings, won't you, Em? The girl nodded enthusiastically. Oh, yes. We can read together every night, and I can show you the new foal and the secret places by the creek. Wilhelmina couldn't help smiling at Emily's excitement, even as she wondered what she had agreed to. A month at Silver Creek Ranch meant a month in close proximity to Ethan Blackburn, a man who increasingly occupied her thoughts in ways that went beyond mere friendship. The following Sunday, Wilhelmina found herself once again in Ethan's buggy, this time with her trunk secured in the back and a crate of school materials beside it. As they left Panamint behind, she felt both trepidation and excitement about the coming weeks. You're quiet, Ethan observed as they crested the hill that offered the first view of the valley. I'm contemplating the wisdom of this arrangement, she admitted. While I appreciate your generosity, I can't help wondering about your motives in offering the bunkhouse. Ethan guided the horses around a bend before answering. Is it so difficult to believe I might simply want to help the school? My ranch employs several men with families in town. Their children's education matters to me. And that's the only reason, he glanced at her, his blue eyes serious. No, not the only reason. I enjoy your company, Wilhelmina. I find myself looking for excuses to visit town more often these days, just for the chance of seeing you. He returned his gaze to the road. But I would never compromise your reputation or position. Mrs. Ortiz will act as chaperone, and you'll have complete privacy in the guest quarters." Wilhelmina felt warmth spread through her chest at his admission. "Thank you for your honesty, and for understanding the delicacy of the situation." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the steady rhythm of hooves and the occasional call of a hawk circling overhead. Finally, Ethan spoke again. "May I ask you something personal, Wilhelmina?" "You may ask," she replied cautiously. "Did you leave someone behind in Vienna? A suitor, perhaps?" The question surprised her. "No," she said after a moment. "There was a professor at the teachers' college who expressed interest, but I did not reciprocate his feelings." She hesitated, then added, "My father's illness and death left little time for courtship, and afterward our financial circumstances made me an impractical match for most eligible men." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "And here, has anyone in California caught your interest?" She felt heat rise to her cheeks and was grateful for the brim of her bonnet that partially hid her face. "The men of Panamint have shown me little but derision until very recently," she said, avoiding a direct answer. "That's not what I asked," he said softly. Wilhelmina gathered her courage and turned to face him directly. "Why do you want to know, Ethan?" His expression was open, vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. "Because I find myself thinking of you far more often than is proper for mere friendship. Because your voice, accent, and all has become the sound I most look forward to hearing each day." His hands tightened on the reins. "Because for the first time since Caroline died, I've found someone who makes me contemplate a future rather than dwell in the past." His confession left her momentarily speechless. When she found her voice, it came out barely above a whisper. "I have no experience with this sort of conversation." "Neither do I," he admitted with a small smile. "Not for many years, at least." "What exactly are you saying, Ethan?" He guided the horses to a stop at a scenic overlook where the valley spread out below them. Turning to face her fully, he took a deep breath. "I'm saying that I care for you, Wilhelmina, more than I expected to care for anyone again. I'm not asking for promises or commitments, it's far too soon for that. I'm simply being honest about my feelings and hoping they might not be entirely one-sided." Wilhelmina looked into his earnest blue eyes and found she couldn't dissemble. "They're not," she said quietly. "One-sided, that is. I care for you too, Ethan. You've been kind when others were cruel, respectful when others were dismissive. You truly see me when most of Panamint sees only a foreigner with a strange accent." Relief and joy transformed his face. Carefully, he reached for her gloved hand, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she didn't, he raised it to his lips for a brief, gentle kiss. "Then perhaps," he suggested, his voice rough with emotion, "we can use this month to better understand these feelings. Without pressure or expectations, simply time together away from the prying eyes of town." "I would like that," she agreed, her heart lighter than it had been in months. He squeezed her hand once before releasing it and taking up the reins again. As they continued toward the ranch, Wilhelmina felt a sense of possibility unfurling within her, a new chapter beginning in this wild, unexpected place, so far from the life she had once known. The transition to living at Silver Creek Ranch proved smoother than Wilhelmina had anticipated. The converted bunkhouse made a surprisingly effective classroom, with its large central space and abundant natural light. Mrs. Ortiz's husband, the ranch foreman who had remained behind while the other hands were on the cattle drive, had crafted simple desks from spare lumber, arranged in neat rows facing a makeshift blackboard. 28 children now made the daily journey from town in wagons driven by parent volunteers. The students seemed to thrive in the rustic setting, with the spacious ranch grounds serving as the perfect playground during breaks. Even the most reluctant learners showed improved attention, perhaps due to the novelty of their surroundings or the natural beauty that surrounded them. Wilhelmina herself flourished in her new temporary home. She occupied a comfortable guest room in the main house, taking her meals with Ethan, Emily, and the Ortiz family. In the evenings, after lesson preparation was complete, she often joined Ethan in the library, where they would read by the fire, discuss books, or simply talk about their lives before Panamint brought them together. As November progressed and the weather turned colder, these evening conversations grew increasingly personal. Ethan shared stories of his Harvard days, and his brief legal career before marriage and subsequent tragedy changed his path. Wilhelmina spoke of her childhood in Vienna, her father's academic pursuits, and her dreams of someday returning to Europe not to stay, but to show its wonders to someone who would appreciate them as she did. "You would love Vienna in the spring," she told him one evening as they sat before the fire, snowflakes drifting past the windows. The lilacs blooming in the Volksgarten, music spilling from every café, the air sweet with the scent of pastries and possibility. "I'd like to see it through your eyes someday," he replied, his gaze lingering on her face in a way that made her pulse quicken. Over the weeks, small gestures of affection had grown more frequent between them, a hand offered to help her across the creek, fingers brushing as they reached for the same book, his palm warm against the small of her back as he guided her through a doorway. Each touch, though innocent by society's standards, carried meaning that neither could deny. One evening in late November, with Emily already retired for the night and the Ortiz family in their own quarters, Wilhelmina and Ethan found themselves alone in the library later than usual. Outside, the season's first serious snowstorm howled around the house, making the warmth of the fire all the more inviting. "I've been meaning to show you something," Ethan said, rising from his chair to retrieve a leather-bound volume from a high shelf. "I found this in San Francisco last month and thought of you immediately." He handed her the book, a collection of Austrian folk tales, printed in Vienna but with English translations. "Oh, Ethan," she breathed, carefully opening the cover to reveal the colorful illustrations within. "This is wonderful. These are the stories my mother read to me as a child." "I hoped it might bring you a touch of home," he said, settling beside her on the small sofa rather than returning to his armchair. Wilhelmina turned the pages reverently, pausing at a particular illustration of a princess in the mountains. "This one was my favorite, the Alpine Rose. My father would always put on different voices for each character." "Would you read it?" Ethan asked. "In German first, then English." "I'd love to hear it in your native tongue." The request touched her deeply. No one in America had ever asked her to speak her mother language, to share that fundamental part of herself. Without hesitation, she began reading, the familiar German words flowing melodically from her lips. She lost herself in the story, her voice rising and falling with the drama of the tale, occasionally glancing up to find Ethan watching her with rapt attention. When she finished the German version and began the English translation, she became acutely aware of how close he sat, his arm resting along the back of the sofa behind her shoulders, his body angled toward hers. The intimacy of the moment, the fire's glow, the storm outside, the shared appreciation of literature created a cocoon of warmth that had nothing to do with the hearth. As she read the final lines of the tale, her voice softened. And so the humble shepherd boy, who had loved the princess for her kind heart rather than her royal blood, won not only the magical Alpine Rose but the hand of his beloved, proving that true love recognizes the music of a kindred soul. She closed the book gently, her fingers tracing the embossed cover. Thank you for this gift, Ethan. It means more than I can express. Your voice when you speak German, he said, his own voice hushed with wonder. It's like listening to a song I've never heard before but somehow recognize in my heart. His words brought tears to her eyes. All the ridicule she had endured in Panamint for her accent, all the whispered mockery and imitations, seemed to fall away in the face of his sincere appreciation. From the first day, he continued, carefully lifting his hand to brush a stray lock of hair from her cheek, when I heard those women criticizing the very thing that makes you uniquely yourself, I wanted to protect you. But I quickly realized you didn't need protection, you needed recognition. Acknowledgement of your strength, your intelligence, your beauty. His fingers lingered against her skin. I meant what I said that day. Your voice is pure music to me, Wilhelmina. Everything about you resonates with something I thought I'd lost forever. The tenderness in his gaze drew her toward him like a beacon. And what was that? She whispered. Hope, he said simply. Hope for a future that holds more than mere existence. Hope for love. The word hung between them, charged with possibility. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Ethan leaned closer. When she didn't move, his lips met hers in a kiss so gentle it felt like a question. Wilhelmina answered by returning the kiss, her hand rising to rest against his chest where she could feel his heart beating as rapidly as her own. The kiss deepened, months of growing affection and restrained desire finally finding expression. When they eventually parted, both slightly breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. I'm falling in love with you, Wilhelmina Sinclair, he murmured. Perhaps I've already fallen. Joy bloomed in her chest, bright and warm. And I with you, Ethan Blackburn. He kissed her again, more firmly this time, his arms drawing her closer. For several minutes they remained entwined, exchanging kisses that ranged from tenderly sweet to passionately intense. Finally, Ethan pulled back, his expression both elated and regretful. We should say good night, he said reluctantly. Much as I wish to continue this, I respect you too much to risk your reputation. Wilhelmina nodded, appreciating his restraint even as part of her wish to ignore propriety entirely. You're right, of course. He rose, offering his hand to help her up. As she stood, he kept hold of her fingers, raising them to his lips for a kiss. Tomorrow, he promised, his eyes conveying what words could not. Tomorrow, she echoed with a smile. That night, as Wilhelmina prepared for bed, she found herself humming a Viennese waltz, her body still tingling from Ethan's kisses, her heart fuller than she had thought possible in this foreign land that was increasingly feeling like home. The following morning brought clear skies and a transformed landscape. The ranch was blanketed in pristine snow that sparkled in the sunlight, creating a scene of breathtaking beauty. Classes proceeded as usual, though Wilhelmina found her thoughts drifting occasionally to the previous evening, and the man whose declaration had changed everything. She saw Ethan only briefly throughout the day, once when he helped clear a path from the main house to the bunkhouse, and again when he delivered additional firewood to keep the classroom warm. Each time his eyes held a special warmth when they met hers, a private acknowledgement of their new understanding. When school dismissed for the day, Emily bounced over to Wilhelmina's desk, her face alight with excitement. Miss Sinclair, Uncle Ethan says we should go sledding after dinner. He's found the old toboggan from the storage shed, and the hill behind the orchard is perfect with all this snow. That sounds delightful, Wilhelmina replied, charmed by the girl's enthusiasm. I haven't been sledding since I was a girl in Austria. Uncle Ethan said you'd probably be good at it since you grew up in the mountains, Emily continued. He says Austrian children probably learn to ski before they learn to walk. Wilhelmina laughed. Not quite, but winter sports are certainly part of life in many regions of Austria. As the last students departed with their parents, Wilhelmina gathered her materials and returned to the main house. She had just changed from her teaching clothes into a warmer skirt and woolen blouse when a knock came at her door. "Yes," she called. "It's Ethan," came the reply. "May I speak with you a moment?" She opened the door to find him standing in the hallway, his expression serious. "Is something wrong?" she asked immediately. "No, not wrong exactly." He glanced down the empty corridor. "May I come in?" "The door can remain open," he added hastily, mindful of propriety despite the privacy the ranch afforded them. Wilhelmina stepped aside, allowing him to enter while leaving the door ajar. "What is it?" Ethan paced a few steps before turning to face her. "I've received a telegram from my sister in San Francisco. Her husband has taken ill and she's requesting that Emily return immediately." "Oh," Wilhelmina said, disappointment evident in her voice. "When must she leave?" "Tomorrow morning. I'll need to take her to town to catch the stage." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of frustration. "That's not all. Harrison also sent word that the schoolhouse renovations are nearly complete ahead of schedule due to the good weather before the snow. Classes can resume in town next week." The news hit Wilhelmina with unexpected force. Her time at the ranch, this magical interlude away from the judgments of Panamint, was coming to an end sooner than anticipated. Ethan must have read the emotions on her face, for he stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "I don't want this to end," he said quietly. "These weeks with you here have been the happiest I've known in years. For me as well," she admitted, "but we knew it was temporary. It doesn't have to be." His blue eyes searched hers. "Wilhelmina, I know this may seem sudden, but my feelings for you are certain. When you return to town, I want everyone to know that my intentions toward you are honorable and permanent." Her breath caught. "What are you saying, Ethan?" "I'm saying that I love you. I want to court you properly, with the ultimate intention of making you my wife if you'll have me." He squeezed her hands gently. "I'm not proposing this minute. I want to do things right, give you time, give us both time to be sure, but I want to be clear about where I hope this leads." Joy surged through Wilhelmina, so intense it brought tears to her eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "And yes, I would welcome your courtship." His face lit with such happiness that it nearly took her breath away. Mindful of the open door, he pressed a quick, chaste kiss to her forehead. "Then let's make the most of our last evening before reality intrudes again," he suggested. "Emily is looking forward to sledding, and so am I, especially if it means holding you to keep you from tumbling down the hill." Wilhelmina laughed, her heart light despite the bittersweet news. "I'll have you know I was quite accomplished on the toboggan as a girl." "Then perhaps you'll have to hold on to me," he replied with a mischievous grin. The evening that followed became one of Wilhelmina's most cherished memories. After dinner, the three of them bundled in coats, scarves, and gloves before heading to the hill behind the orchard. Emily's delighted shrieks echoed through the cold air as they took turns sliding down the snowy slope. Sometimes individually, and sometimes together, Ethan with his arms protectively around both Wilhelmina and his niece as they careened downhill. Later, rosy-cheeked and breathless, they warmed themselves before the library fire with hot chocolate prepared by Mrs. Ortiz. Emily, exhausted from the excitement and physical exertion, fell asleep on the sofa. As Ethan carried the sleeping child to her room, Wilhelmina felt a pang of longing for what might have been more evenings like this, the three of them together in this house that had begun to feel like home. When Ethan returned, he found her gazing into the fire, lost in thought. "Penny for your thoughts," he said softly, taking a seat beside her. I was thinking about belonging, she replied. How strange it is that I've felt more at home in these few weeks on your ranch than in all my months in Panamint. The ranch has that effect on people, he said. Or perhaps it's the company, she smiled at that. Perhaps. You know, he said thoughtfully, once Emily returns to San Francisco, this house will feel very empty. You'll miss her terribly. I will, he agreed. But I was thinking more about how quiet the evenings will be without our literary discussions, how the library will seem emptier without you in it. Wilhelmina felt a similar emptiness opening inside her at the thought of returning to her small hotel room in town. I will miss this place, she said softly, and you most of all. I'll come to town often, he promised, taking her hand. And perhaps you might still visit the ranch on occasion, for purely educational purposes, of course, he added with a teasing smile. My library is always open to the town's teacher. Of course, she agreed, returning his smile. I'm sure Mrs. Peterson and the other ladies will find nothing at all to gossip about when the foreign schoolteacher makes regular visits to the eligible bachelor's ranch. Ethan laughed. Let them talk. Soon enough, they'll have more substantial matters to discuss, such as, she prompted. His expression grew more serious. Such as my courtship of the most intelligent, beautiful woman in the territory. Such as my intention to make that woman my wife, should she continue to find my company agreeable. Heat flooded Wilhelmina's cheeks. I believe she will find it most agreeable indeed. In the privacy of the firelit library, with Emily safely asleep upstairs, Ethan pulled Wilhelmina into his arms for a kiss that spoke of promises and possibilities, of a future neither had expected to find in this remote corner of California. The next morning brought tearful goodbyes as Emily departed for San Francisco. The girl hugged Wilhelmina fiercely, extracting promises of letters and future visits. After seeing her safely onto the stagecoach, Ethan and Wilhelmina took advantage of their time in town to speak with Mr. Harrison about the schoolhouse renovations. Ready for occupancy by Monday, the school board chairman confirmed, showing them the improvements: a second classroom for the older students, a new heating system, and expanded storage for books and supplies. It looks wonderful, Wilhelmina acknowledged, though she couldn't help comparing the utilitarian space to the warm, inviting bunkhouse classroom at the ranch. The board is pleased with how you've managed the temporary arrangement, Miss Sinclair, Harrison continued. Several parents have commented on their children's improved enthusiasm for learning. He glanced at Ethan. And of course, we're grateful for Mr. Blackburn's generosity in providing the space. Happy to help, Ethan replied. Education benefits the entire community. As they left the schoolhouse, Wilhelmina noticed a distinct change in how townspeople regarded her. Nods of greeting had replaced the previous stares and whispers. When they stopped at the general store for supplies, the shopkeeper addressed her respectfully, without a trace of the mockery that had once characterized his treatment. You've noticed the difference, Ethan observed as they walked back toward the hotel where Wilhelmina would spend the weekend, before returning to the ranch for a final few days of classes. It's remarkable what a difference a few weeks can make, she agreed. Or perhaps it's the company I'm keeping. Perhaps they're finally recognizing your worth, he suggested, his hand brushing against hers as they walked, though I'd like to think I played some small part in opening their eyes. A significant part, she corrected. Your respect made them reconsider their judgments. They reached the hotel, where Ethan would leave her until Sunday afternoon when he would return with the wagon to transport the remaining school materials back to the ranch for the final week of classes. I'll count the hours, he said quietly as they stood on the hotel's porch, mindful of propriety now that they were back in public view. As will I, she replied, her accent thickening with emotion as it often did when her feelings ran deep. Ethan's eyes warmed at the sound. "Your voice," he said softly. "It still amazes me how those fools could ever have mocked something so beautiful." Before she could respond, he tipped his hat respectfully and turned to leave, every inch the proper gentleman despite the tender look they had shared. Watching him stride down the street toward the livery stable where he'd left his horse, Wilhelmina realized with sudden clarity that she was not merely falling in love with Ethan Blackburn. She had already fallen completely, irrevocably in love with him. The knowledge settled in her heart like a precious stone, warm and solid and infinitely valuable. The final week of classes at the ranch passed too quickly. Each evening, Wilhelmina and Ethan shared dinner and conversation before retiring to the library, where their discussions ranged from literature to philosophy to their hopes for the future. With Emily gone and the cattle drive still underway, the house was quiet, creating an intimate atmosphere that deepened their connection. On Thursday evening, the night before the last day of classes at the ranch, Ethan surprised Wilhelmina by asking her to dress for dinner rather than changing into her usual comfortable attire. "Is there a special occasion?" she asked, curious. "Perhaps," he replied with a mysterious smile. "Wear something nice." When she descended the stairs at 7 o'clock, she found the dining room transformed. Candles flickered on the table, which had been set with Ethan's finest china and crystal. A vase of hothouse flowers, rare and expensive in the winter months, formed a centerpiece. Ethan himself awaited her, dressed in a formal suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and tall frame. His eyes widened appreciatively as he took in her appearance, a deep blue evening dress she had brought from Vienna, but had found little occasion to wear in Panamint. "You look stunning," he said, coming forward to take her hand. "As do you," she replied, admiring how the formal attire suited him. "What's the occasion?" Instead of answering directly, he led her to the table and held her chair. "Mrs. Ortiz appeared with the first course, a delicate soup that Wilhelmina recognized as a traditional Austrian recipe. "How did you?" she began, looking up in surprise. "Mrs. Ortiz is quite resourceful when properly motivated," Ethan said with a smile. "I may have bribed her with a significant bonus to learn a few Austrian dishes." The entire meal followed this pattern, each course reminiscent of Viennese cuisine, adapted slightly to use available ingredients but unmistakably crafted to remind Wilhelmina of home. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her deeply. "Ethan, this is incredible," she said, as Mrs. Ortiz cleared the dessert plates, a creditable attempt at sachertorte that had brought tears to Wilhelmina's eyes at the first bite. "Thank you for such a lovely evening." "It's not over yet," he replied, standing and offering his hand. "There's music in the library." Indeed, when they entered the familiar room, she found a small gramophone set up near the fireplace, another luxury rarely seen in frontier towns. "May I have this dance?" Ethan asked formally, bowing slightly. As the first notes of a Strauss waltz filled the room, Wilhelmina's heart swelled with emotion. "You remembered," she whispered, recalling how she had once mentioned that her father would play the Blue Danube on special occasions. "I remember everything you tell me," he said simply, taking her in his arms. They moved together around the library, the furniture pushed back to create a small dance floor. Ethan proved to be an accomplished dancer, leading her through the waltz with confident steps that spoke of his Eastern upbringing. As the music continued, he held her closer than strict propriety might allow, though with Mrs. Ortiz discreetly present in the house, they maintained a facade of decorum. They danced through 3 waltzes, lost in the music and each other's arms, before the final notes faded into silence. Rather than releasing her, Ethan kept one arm around her waist as he reached into his jacket pocket with his free hand. "Wilhelmina," he said, his voice suddenly serious. "I had planned to wait longer, to court you properly in town, to give you more time to be certain." His blue eyes held hers intently. "But these weeks with you have shown me that certainty doesn't always require time. Sometimes the heart knows immediately what the mind takes longer to accept." Her breath caught as he withdrew a small velvet box from his pocket. "Ethan." "I love you," he said simply. "Your intelligence, your courage, your kindness. I love the way your accent thickens when you're emotional, the way you explain complex ideas to children with such patience, the way you've brought life and warmth back to this house." He released her waist to open the box, revealing a delicate gold ring set with a sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. "This was my grandmother's. I would be honored if you would wear it as my wife." Emotion overwhelmed Wilhelmina, bringing tears to her eyes and temporarily robbing her of speech. When she found her voice, the Austrian lilt was more pronounced than usual. "I love you too, Ethan, more than I thought possible when I came to this wild place." "Is that a yes?" he asked, hope and vulnerability mingled in his expression. "Yes," she said, the single word carrying all the certainty in her heart. "Yes, I will marry you." His face transformed with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the sapphire catching the firelight as if alive with its own inner flame. Ethan pulled her close, capturing her lips in a kiss that sealed their promise to each other. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I've been planning this for days," he admitted. "I couldn't bear the thought of you returning to town tomorrow without knowing you would someday return to the ranch permanently." "As your wife," she said wonderingly, the words still new and magical on her tongue. "As my wife," he confirmed. "My partner, my love, my home." He kissed her again, more gently this time. "We can wait as long as you wish before the wedding. Spring, summer, whenever you feel ready." Wilhelmina considered this. "Spring," she decided, "when the wildflowers bloom in the valley." Not too soon to be improper, but not so far away that we must wait unnecessarily. Ethan laughed, the sound rich with happiness. "Practical as always, spring it is." His expression grew more serious. "There will be talk in town, you know. Not everyone will approve of the foreign schoolteacher marrying one of the territory's most eligible bachelors." "Let them talk," she said, echoing his words from weeks ago. "Their opinions matter far less to me now than they once did." "Besides," he added with a mischievous gleam in his eye, "our children will speak English with a distinct Austrian lilt that will drive Mrs. Peterson to distraction." "Children," Wilhelmina repeated, her heart expanding at the thought. "At least two," he said confidently. "Boys or girls, it makes no difference to me, as long as they have your courage and perhaps your accent." "And your love of books," she added, imagining a future with small children gathered in this very library, learning to read from two parents who valued education above all. They spent the remainder of the evening discussing their future, planning not just the wedding but the life they would build together. When at last they said goodnight reluctantly, both wishing propriety didn't demand separate bedchambers until their vows were spoken, Wilhelmina felt a sense of completion she had never expected to find so far from her homeland. In her room, she stood by the window, gazing out at the moonlit valley while turning the sapphire ring on her finger. The girl who had left Vienna seeking only financial security through employment had found something far more precious, a love that transcended language and custom. A man who cherished the very differences others had ridiculed. A future filled with promise in this wild, beautiful land. The next morning, the final day of classes at the ranch, Wilhelmina found it difficult to concentrate on teaching. Her mind kept drifting to the ring hidden beneath her glove. They had agreed to announce their engagement formally on Sunday, after the last students had returned to town, and to the man whose proposal had transformed her future. When the last wagon of children departed and the bunkhouse had been restored to its original purpose, Ethan helped Wilhelmina gather her personal belongings from the guest room she had occupied for the past month. "It feels strange to be packing," she admitted, as she folded a dress into her trunk. "Almost as if I'm leaving home rather than returning to town." "You are leaving home," Ethan said, leaning against the doorframe as he watched her. "Temporarily, but you'll be back soon enough as the mistress of this house rather than a guest." The thought sent a pleasant shiver through her. "It doesn't quite seem real yet." "It will," he promised, coming to stand behind her and placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "When you're planning the wedding, when you're choosing which furnishings to keep and which to replace, when you're instructing Mrs. Ortiz on your preferences for running the household, then it will feel real." She turned in his arms, looking up at him with love and gratitude. "Thank you for seeing me when others looked past me, for hearing music when others heard only strangeness. Thank you for bringing joy back into my life when I thought it was gone forever," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. He kissed her then, a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, passionate yet tender, a perfect balance like the partnership they were building. The journey back to Panamint the next day carried none of the trepidation Wilhelmina had felt on previous returns to town. With Ethan beside her and his ring on her finger, though still hidden beneath her glove, she faced the prospect of town gossip with newfound confidence. They had agreed to announce their engagement first to Mr. Harrison and the school board, out of respect for Wilhelmina's position. The news was received with varying degrees of surprise, and to Wilhelmina's relief, general approval. "Congratulations to you both," Harrison said, shaking Ethan's hand warmly. "Though I can't say I'm entirely shocked. The way you two looked at each other during board meetings this past month, well, let's just say some of us had suspicions." "And my position?" Wilhelmina asked cautiously. "I understand if the board feels a married woman shouldn't continue teaching." Harrison exchanged glances with the other board members present. "Actually, Miss Sinclair, or soon to be Mrs. Blackburn, we were hoping you might consider staying on, at least through the end of the school year. Good teachers are hard to find in these parts, married or not." Relief and gratitude flooded through her. "I would be delighted to continue," she said sincerely. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Panamint. By supper time, the hotel dining room buzzed with whispers as Ethan and Wilhelmina entered together, her ring now proudly displayed on her left hand. To Wilhelmina's surprise, many townspeople approached their table to offer congratulations. Even those who had once mocked her accent now seemed eager to claim friendship with the future Mrs. Blackburn. She accepted their good wishes graciously, though Ethan's tight-lipped smile suggested he had not forgotten their previous treatment of his fiancée. Only Mrs. Peterson maintained her disapproval, refusing to acknowledge the couple when they passed her table. Her cold glare followed them throughout the meal, a silent testament to her thwarted ambitions regarding Ethan. "She'll come around," Ethan murmured as they left the dining room, "or she won't. Either way, her opinion matters little to our happiness." The following months passed in a whirlwind of teaching, wedding preparations, and weekend visits to the ranch. Wilhelmina continued to face occasional prejudice about her accent, but the barbs had lost their power to wound. For every person who still mimicked her speech, 3 others now defended her, a change she attributed to Ethan's influence and her own growing confidence. By March, Signs of spring began to appear in the valley, tender green shoots pushing through the soil, wildflowers dotting the hillsides with color, days growing longer and warmer. Wilhelmina had chosen April 18th for their wedding date, when the land would be fully awake from its winter slumber. As the day approached, Wilhelmina received a wonderful surprise, a letter from her mother and sister announcing their intention to attend the wedding. Ethan had secretly sent them funds for the journey, along with a heartfelt letter introducing himself and expressing his desire to meet the women who had shaped Wilhelmina's character. "You are the most thoughtful man," she told him when she discovered his role in the surprise. "I can't believe they're coming all this way. I couldn't let you marry without family present," he replied simply. "And I want to know the women who raised such an extraordinary daughter and sister." The reunion at the San Francisco port was tearful and joyous. Frau Sinclair, a dignified woman in her 50s, embraced her daughter before turning a critical maternal eye on Ethan. "So," she said in English nearly as accented as Wilhelmina's, "you are the man who has captured my daughter's heart so far from home." "I hope to prove worthy of her trust, madam," Ethan replied respectfully. After a moment's scrutiny, Frau Sinclair's expression softened. "I believe you will, Mr. Blackburn." Wilhelmina's sister, Liesel, a younger, more vivacious version of Wilhelmina herself, was less reserved in her approval. "Well done, Willa," she whispered in German as they rode to the hotel where the women would stay until the journey to Panamint the next day. "He's handsome, wealthy, and looks at you as if you hung the moon." The wedding itself exceeded all of Wilhelmina's expectations. Held in the meadow behind the ranch house, with the valley in full bloom around them, the ceremony combined American traditions with a few Austrian customs Frau Sinclair insisted upon. Nearly the entire town attended, even Mrs. Peterson, though she remained stone-faced throughout. Wilhelmina wore a gown of ivory silk that Liesel had helped her select in San Francisco, with a crown of wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Ethan, resplendent in a new suit, watched her walk toward him with such undisguised adoration that several guests were seen dabbing at their eyes. When it came time to speak their vows, Wilhelmina's accent was more pronounced than usual, emotion thickening her words as she pledged her love and fidelity. Rather than causing embarrassment, the musical lilt of her voice seemed perfectly suited to the occasion, a reminder of the journey that had brought her to this moment. "I loved you first for your voice," Ethan told her during his own vows, loud enough for all to hear. For the courage it represented, for the heritage it honored, for the beauty others were too ignorant to recognize. "I will love that voice and everything about you until my dying day." There wasn't a dry eye in the gathering as they were pronounced husband and wife. The celebration continued well into the evening, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed the county twice over. As night fell, lanterns illuminated the area where guests continued to celebrate, while the newlyweds slipped away to the privacy of the house, now their home together. In the sanctuary of their bedroom, with moonlight spilling through the windows, Ethan took Wilhelmina's face gently between his hands. "Frau Blackburn," he said softly, using the German honorific rather than the English Mrs., a small gesture that touched her deeply. "Are you happy?" "Glücklicher als ich jemals für möglich gehalten hätte," she replied in German before translating. "Happier than I ever thought possible." "Say something else in German," he requested, his eyes warm with love. "Anything." She smiled and whispered words of love in her native tongue, watching as he closed his eyes to better absorb the sound. When she finished, he opened them again, his gaze intense. "I will never tire of hearing you speak," he said earnestly, "in any language." "And I will never tire of being truly heard," she replied, rising on tiptoe to kiss him a kiss that marked the beginning of their life together. Epilogue. 5 years later, the sound of children's laughter echoed through the orchard as Wilhelmina Blackburn made her way up the path toward home, a basket of freshly picked apples on her arm. Behind her, the new schoolhouse gleamed white in the afternoon sun, a 2-room building constructed on Blackburn land 3 years ago, when Wilhelmina had decided to continue teaching despite her marriage. Rather than having children travel from town, Ethan had proposed building a school that served both the ranch families and those willing to make the journey from Panamint. The school board had readily agreed, impressed by the improved academic performance under Wilhelmina's guidance and eager to accommodate the now influential Blackburns. As she neared the house, Wilhelmina spotted her husband in the front garden, their 3-year-old son Johann perched on his shoulders while their 18-month-old daughter Elizabeth toddled beside them, clutching her father's hand. "Mama," Johann called out, waving frantically. "Papa is showing us the butterflies." "I see them," she replied, smiling at the picture they made, Ethan's dark hair now touched with silver at the temples, the children's fair heads gleaming gold in the sunlight. Ethan looked up at the sound of her voice, his face lighting with the same joy it had shown on their wedding day. 5 years of marriage had only deepened their connection, each day bringing new reasons to be grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together. "How was school today, Professor?" he asked as she approached, using his favorite nickname for her. Last year, the board had officially named her principal of the Silver Creek School, acknowledging what everyone already knew, that Wilhelmina Blackburn's educational methods produced exceptional results. "Wonderful," she replied, setting down her basket to accept Elizabeth's eager embrace. Maria Rodriguez read an entire page without hesitation, and young Thomas finally mastered his multiplication tables. "And did anyone comment on your accent?" he asked with a knowing smile. She laughed, the sound as melodic as her speech. "Not in years, as you well know, though Mrs. Peterson still purses her lips whenever I speak at town meetings." "Some people never change," Ethan remarked, swinging Johann down from his shoulders. "But most do, given enough time and evidence." Indeed, Panamint had changed dramatically in its attitude toward the once ridiculed foreign teacher. Parents now boasted of their children's education under Mrs. Blackburn, the Austrian lady with the European methods. Even those who had been her harshest critics now spoke with pride about the cosmopolitan atmosphere of their growing town. As the family made their way into the house, expanded now, to accommodate their growing family and frequent visitors from both San Francisco and Vienna, Wilhelmina reflected on how completely her life had transformed from that first difficult day in Panamint. The night was warm enough to dine on the veranda, watching the sun set over the valley, while the children chattered about their day, Johann in perfect English with just the faintest hint of his mother's accent, Elizabeth still forming words in the delightful mixture of English and German that comprised her developing vocabulary. After the children were tucked into bed with stories in both languages, Ethan and Wilhelmina retired to the library, still their favorite room, though now featuring a piano Ethan had surprised her with on their 3rd anniversary. "Play something," he requested, settling into his favorite chair with a book of poetry. "Something from Vienna." Wilhelmina smiled and seated herself at the instrument, her fingers finding the familiar notes of a Strauss waltz. As she played, she glanced at her husband, who had closed his eyes to better appreciate the music, just as he had closed his eyes years ago to better hear her accent, finding beauty where others had heard only difference. "What are you thinking?" he asked, opening his eyes to find her watching him. "I'm thinking how fortunate I am," she replied honestly, "to have found a man who not only accepted my differences but cherished them, who heard music when others heard only strangeness." Ethan rose and came to sit beside her on the piano bench, his arms slipping around her waist. "I'm the fortunate one," he corrected, "to have found a second chance at happiness with a woman brave enough to cross an ocean for a new beginning." Their lips met in a kiss as familiar yet thrilling as the day they first expressed their love. When they parted, Ethan rested his forehead against hers in the gesture that had become their own special sign of intimacy. "Ich liebe dich," he whispered in carefully practiced German. "And I love you," she replied in the English that was now as much a part of her as her native tongue. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days that follow." Outside, the stars emerged one by one over the valley, witnessing the enduring love of a couple brought together by circumstance, but bound by something far stronger, the recognition of kindred spirits, whose differences had become their greatest strength, whose voices, when joined together, created a harmony neither could have achieved alone.